Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Nate Gorns, the Technology to Market Advisor here at ARPA-E. Thanks for tuning in to this ARPA-E University webinar titled Charitable Investment for Energy Innovation 101. I'm joined today by two esteemed guests, David Bank, who is CEO and editor of Impact Alpha, which is an investment news service focused on sustainability. And my other guest is Sarah Kearney, founder and executive director of the PRIs Coalition, which is a nonprofit organization focused on drawing charitable capital into market-based, climate-friendly solutions. I'm not going to go through their long and illustrious bios. They are certainly illustrious and will be posted alongside this presentation, but at the onset here at ARPA-E, wanted to thank them for providing their expertise and participation today. So what are we hoping to accomplish? We're going to take a quick 45-minute tour on charitable investments and how they can be applied to clean energy. I'll briefly set the stage on why ARPA-E cares about this domain and some of the capital challenges we are seeing. David will follow me with a presentation providing an overview of program-related investing, the evolution of this tool, and the lessons from some other sectors. We'll then pivot to Sarah, who will provide an overview of how charitable investing can support clean energy and the approach the PRIs Coalition has taken. We'll conclude with a few minutes of moderated Q&A. So let me just start with a brief refresher on ARPA-E. We are the hip, cool stepchild of the Department of Energy. We're a semi-autonomous agency that invests over $280 million per year in high-risk but potentially transformational energy technologies. We have a very broad mission, encompasses energy efficiency, reducing energy imports, and reducing energy emissions, which enables us to fund all kinds of crazy ideas, ranging from flying wind turbines to personalized robots that control your temperature envelope to novel fusion reactors to UAV-mounted methane sensors. Very wide gamut. How do we do this? We fund teams from academia, startups, and small businesses, and even large corporations to pursue novel ideas that can fundamentally change the learning curve of a technology. We don't look for incremental improvements. It's certainly important work to march down the cost curve, and lots of organizations do this. What we seek to do is fund disruptive ideas that can fundamentally change our energy landscape in terms of cost, performance, or both. To accomplish this, we know that many of the technologies we fund will fail, and you'll see those on this graph marked by the X, but the few that do succeed will make an outsized impact. Now, at ARPA-E, we not only require teams to take on a lot of technical risk and push them to succeed technically, we also want to make sure that they make commercial progress, because really that's the only way to disrupt the energy marketplace. In fact, the driving question that we pose to every single project here at ARPA-E is, if it works, will it matter? And how do we measure if it matters? Well, we've been around for about 7 years. We've awarded $1.3 billion to over 500 projects. And some of the leading indicators that we've had to date are that we've had 45 projects raise over $1.2 billion in private sector equity. We've had 36 new companies formed, and we've had over 60 government partnerships and handoffs. And while we view this as great progress in our seven years of history, really what we see these are leading indicators. What ultimately matters are products deployed at scale in the marketplace. To date, we have over 14 ARPA-E projects in the commercial marketplace. We expect many more. However, the big challenge is that funding novel energy technologies, especially hardware, is really freaking hard. It's capital intensive, has long product cycles, oftentimes decades. It's typically an undifferentiated product and almost always competes in a commodity marketplace that has been built up with trillions of dollars over more than a century. And so while we play a significant role in early stage funding, our typical engagements are around 3 years, we need our projects to continue beyond the term of our award if they're going to march toward the commercial arena. And fundamentally, this requires additional follow-on funding. Could be a government entity, could be a philanthropic, could be a private sector, but our teams need cash to get to the marketplace. Which brings us to the purpose of today. You know, there really is, for those of us who have played in this space, there's a clear and acute challenge in bringing early stage equity capital to clean energy technologies. There was a whole lot of enthusiasm in the venture capital community 6-7 years ago when the thinking was that, you know, the global energy market is many multiples the size of the internet and is ripe for disruption. However, the clean tech success stories have been limited, and the amount of capital, as you can see on the top of this graphic, especially for early stage hardware, has declined precipitously. It's not only that, you know, and it's not only venture capitalists that have learned that clean tech is definitely not tech. The limited partners, the folks that contribute capital into specific funds of different venture firms, they've also retreated from the clean tech space. And, you know, I think the quote that's illustrative there at the bottom is that based on a survey of the limited partnerships, only 5% said they would focus on green-focused funds going forward. So not a lot of great news, but is there any good news? We think there are some interesting developments related to new sources of capital wanting to come into the clean energy space. And, you know, along with that capital, there's a better understanding that this market has particular challenges, scale-up requirements, lumpy investments, very long tenures. And so, you know, on this slide, I want to, which I'm sure many have seen, you see the energy development cycle and the two valleys of death. Here at ARPA-E, we're very much focused on the innovation valley of death, applied R&D getting to a prototype or proof of concept. However, you know, what's encouraging about the clean tech space is that over the last couple of years, there have been a number of asset owners, foundations, and program-related investments, family offices, high net worth individuals, to name a few, that have signaled a willingness to come and invest along this development and deployment chain. Some are focused on the earlier stage, some span the entire gamut, but that is what we're going to dive into today and learn about. And with that, I'm excited to turn it over to David.
Thanks, Nate. I'm delighted to be here. You and Sarah have been great teachers on the energy front. We at Impact Alpha have been looking across the range of investments in ventures and projects that have social and environmental benefits, kind of under the rubric of what's come to be called impact investing. And in particular, we're looking at areas where there are capital gaps, where the commercial capital markets are not financing the kinds of things that are required in various sectors, whether it's smallholder farming or conservation finance or small and medium enterprise development. And we've gotten, in that context, interested in a category of funding called program-related investments. And I will get into what those are. There's a fair amount of wonky policy aspects to it. But the basic idea is that that foundations can deploy capital to for-profit enterprises. Traditionally, of course, foundations have usually given grants, and usually to nonprofits. And so the notion that foundations can invest in for-profit enterprises is relatively new. The program-related investments themselves go back about 50 years, but for most of that time, they were fairly what we call, vanilla loans to nonprofits to buy a building or something to house their operations. More recently, some strategic investors among some leading foundations have realized that this is a kind of category of capital that they have that can be used to bridge these capital gaps. And the reason is that they're not as constrained as commercial investors for either the low risk or high returns that commercial investors have come to expect. So they have the ability to be kind of flexible, patient, either high risk or low return capital. And in that context, the leading foundations are thinking maybe we can do something that's not just funding only one venture, but we can actually change the dynamics in a marketplace, and we can crowd in commercial capital for these kinds of projects more broadly. So the kinds of ways that this capital can be used, and this slide shows it, is demonstrating a sector or a market. So where the marketplace, and you mentioned the sort of rise and fall of clean tech investing, where the marketplace has decided that there's something funky about this space, and there's but perhaps that can be disproven. There's particular risks that can be mitigated in various cases. So sometimes this capital can be used as first loss guarantees or other kinds of ways to reassure investors. In many cases, those guarantees never get called, and it's actually a relatively cheap way to change the investment dynamics of a particular venture. Sometimes a company just needs to create a track record and get into business, and then that company will be off and running and be able to attract commercial investors. Sometimes there's other kinds of ways that are sort of financial engineering ways where you syndicate and bundle up risks to diversify. And then sometimes it's literally a subsidy, and that just brings in commercial capital by, frankly, raising their returns. And there's some controversy around that, I should say. You know, should private foundations, charitable foundations be effectively juicing up the returns of commercial investors? And there's a raging debate. One side of it says, you know, that's not appropriate use of charitable funds. The other side says, hey, we've put in a very little bit amount of money, we've crowded in a lot of commercial capital, and in fact, we've leveraged our very small amount of philanthropic money in a good way. So to get into the weeds a little bit on what the legalities of program-related investments are, and this is kind of the standard definitions, investments to support charitable activities that involve a potential return of capital. So that's pretty broad. But the key to it is the primary purpose has to be charitable. And foundations will, you know, bend over backwards and consult a lot of lawyers to make sure that the purpose is charitable, and will, in many cases, write that into, you know, legally binding contracts. Financial return is not a significant purpose, and this is a key factor too. You can't go into it as a foundation seeking to make a high return. Now, that's often misunderstood. You can, in fact, in the end, have made a high return. It just can't be your primary purpose. Your primary purpose must be charitable. And then, of course, you can't use it to influence legislation. Within that, there is quite a lot of flexibility in how this kind of capital can be used. An example is a low-interest loan that Packard Foundation made to a fund called EcoTrust Forest that was trying to demonstrate sustainable timber practices in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the Pacific Northwest, of course, is a great timber region, but because the wood there is so valuable, the timberlands that grow it are very expensive, and makes the returns for a sustainable timber farm less competitive with what you know, commercial and timber practices might get. And so timber investors would shy away from sustainable timber funds. So EcoTrust Forest has a very developed strategy of how do you manage timber for both timber returns, but also other kinds of benefits for jobs, for wildlife, for water, for scenic benefits. And they used this $10 million 1% loan from the Packard Foundation to backstop what I think was a $52 million fund overall, lowered their overall cost of capital, which allowed them to have higher overall returns, and that brought in commercial investors who topped up the fund. And the idea there is that, in fact, if all things work out, the returns on that fund will, in fact, justify you know, commercial investors in follow-on funds. So it's demonstrating the market potential of a comprehensive, holistic, sustainable timber management. Another example, direct early-stage equity, and this may be more relevant to the early-stage climate innovation. The Gates Foundation has made 14 investments totaling $167 million in early-stage biotech companies. Now, a lot of these biotech companies are focused on, you know, blockbuster drugs that will have, you know, great effect in the developed markets. They tend not to focus on neglected diseases, so-called, in the developing world, where the commercial returns are obviously much lower. But often the same platform, the same biotechnology is useful in both cases. So what the Gates Foundation has done, generally speaking, is both make investments in the company itself, a direct equity investment, and then also supply grant funding to underwrite the specific investments in malaria or TB or HIV. And then the company is obligated actually to obviously do that work, but also to make the subsequent drug discoveries available in those low-income countries at affordable prices. And this is written into what's called a Global Access Agreement, which is, again, a legally binding contract that obligates them to this to this pricing regime. And one that we focus on in this report that we put out in the spring deals with Kymab, a UK company that has a mouse, a transgenic mouse that mimics the human immune system. And the Gates Foundation put a $20 million equity investment into it. And it was quite high risk. At the time, the company was facing various IP, patent infringement lawsuits and whatnot, and other investors were shying away. But the mouse technology was valuable for, as I said, malaria and TB and HIV, and the Gates Foundation wanted to make sure that it was available to those kind of researchers. In fact, the patent legal dispute got ironed out. They got subsequent investment, and I think there's some recent news that they've made some breakthroughs on the HIV front. And then a third way is investments into fund managers themselves. And people don't often remember, DBL Partners is now quite well known for their investments in Tesla and Solar City and other home runs. But when they started, they had a thesis around not only clean tech, but also low-income job development, economic development. And they were shy. Commercial investors, commercial LPs would not invest, and they raised most of this first $75 million fund from foundations like Ford, Casey, MacArthur, the Heron Foundation. Those investments, at least enough of them, proved out, and they have last year raised their third fund for $400 million. And of course, they're not now eligible for these program-related investments because they are quite a commercial market rate fund. But early foundation money played a key role in sort of proving out both the clean tech thesis and also this economic development thesis. So given how effective and leveraged these investments can be made, you'd think that all foundations would say, wow, this is an effective strategy where we can take what is, sounds like a large amount of $700 billion or so in U.S. foundation endowments, but really is just a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed to move the needle on these big social and environmental challenges. And you'd think they'd say, well, we can leverage the private capital markets to come along with us and work on these challenges. But in fact, PRIs are still quite a small slice of foundation grant funding. And so there's about $50 billion a year in grants, and there's been somewhat under $4 billion total in the last 15 or so years in PRIs. And this is partly a risk avoidance issue for the foundations. There's been some level of ambiguity about what's actually allowed under the IRS rules. There's also transaction costs, legal costs, other costs to structuring these deals that have kept some foundations from being able to do this. There's progress on all of these fronts. Earlier this year, the IRS issued new guidance. They put out what are basically sort of templates or examples of kinds of investments that can qualify as PRIs. This disease research example that I mentioned in terms of early stage biotech is now kind of covered by these examples. There's kinds of loan guarantees, smallholder ag finance, and some environmental areas, but they did not call out, and I think Sarah will get into this more, early stage climate or climate at all as a particular area of PRI. So that's still on the horizon. The takeaways, I guess, is both for entrepreneurs and for co-investors. For entrepreneurs, if you have a charitable purpose, if you are a mission-driven company, if you believe that your company will solve some big challenge that's important to the world, you might want to think about whether you can get interest a foundation in providing a program-related investment. You need to know what your impact is, and you need to be able to describe how you're going to measure it. And sometimes that may be at odds, or your investors may think it's at odds with your commercial opportunities. So you have to weigh those pros and cons. If you have such a mission and you have such a product, you may be able to get grants to cover some of the early R&D costs of it. And then, as I said, beware the hidden costs of the capital. So it sounds like, you know, low-cost money, but in fact there are reporting requirements. There are all the kinds of things that come along with any kind of strategic investor who may have other agendas besides necessarily the total success of your company. They may have, you know, just like corporate strategic investors are looking for synergies with their product line, you know, foundation strategic investors may be looking for system change outcomes that are not necessarily central to your own mission. So there are costs. It's not just free money, but it is an interesting source of capital. And then for co-investors who, you know, might see that there's an interesting domain of investment, but that there are, you know, sort of risks that they can't necessarily mitigate, whether those are political risks, whether those are long time horizons, other kinds of risks, that this may be a way to kind of make the deal work. There's foundations have great access both to in the field, to the NGO world, to the government world, sometimes to the scientific world, that can give access and knowledge. There's other kinds of ways where the money is helpful. Again, there's also potential for misalignment between the different kinds of investors, and everybody should be aware of what different players are bringing to the table. And finally, of course, when you're dealing with all these kinds of requirements and legalities, the foundation world may move more slowly than the venture capital world is used to, and if you're going to get in bed with charitable foundations, you should be prepared for sometimes longer time horizons in getting the deals done. So with that, I'd look forward to taking this to the energy example in particular.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was a great overview of kind of the landscape, history, some examples, IRS guidance, and then entrepreneur and investor guidance for PRIs, which really sets the stage for Sarah's talk, and I'll pass the baton to her now about how PRIs can relate to energy. So with that, Sarah, it's all yours.
Nate, hi everyone. My name is Sarah Carney, and outside of spending time with my family, one of my biggest passions in life is unlocking the floodgates of philanthropic capital to support energy innovation and deployment. I get out of bed every morning to try to do my part to help mitigate climate change, and I see my personal contribution as trying to move more charitable contribution into early-stage energy companies. So I'm just thrilled to join Nate and David today to share more about what I've learned over the past decade working at the intersection of philanthropy and energy innovation. My journey to the field started in 2006 when I started serving as executive director and trustee of the Chisonis Family Foundation. It next took me to graduate school at MIT in 2010, where I learned that there are many underused ways to put charitable capital to work for early-stage energy ventures. And then I founded PRIM in 2014 to knock down the very high barriers that are holding the field back. PRIM is a public charity that facilitates demonstrative charitable investments and builds connectivity between philanthropists and climate innovators. I'll speak for the next 15 minutes about where the field of charitable investing to support clean energy stands today and what we've built at PRIM to encourage increased philanthropic investment activity in the energy sector in the years to come. To start, I agree strongly with what Nate described earlier in the webinar. There are gaps in the innovation and deployment pipeline that are absolutely holding us back from achieving our climate and energy goals. These capital gaps are preventing us both from building financially successful for-profit companies or projects like many ARPA-E grant recipients, but they're also holding us back from achieving social outcomes such as climate change mitigation, environmental conservation, advancement of science, economic development and job creation, or poverty alleviation. And these are the charitable causes that are paramount for charitable investors, just as David mentioned earlier. As context for my talk, I should mention that charitable capital could step into any of the capital gaps outlined above on this slide that are not covered by traditional investors. But at Primes today, we focus exclusively on the earliest stages of company formation, primarily because we know the capital gaps 1 and 2 outlined here are acute, and we know that we might be able to shake free investment in the size that early stage companies need, even though philanthropic investment in this area is in its really, really early days. We've already heard from Nate that private investment into early stage energy companies has decreased precipitously over the past decade, leaving us with virtually no one that's willing to go first in supporting new ventures that might be capital intensive, have long technology development timelines, have necessary piloting or testing with risky outcomes, are competing against entrenched incumbents, or operate in an industry with poor valuation comparables. Unfortunately, the numbers on this slide are usually surprising to philanthropists that may not be in the weeds on venture investing. The good news is that philanthropists do indeed have the tools that they need to step into the gap. David already shared how pioneering foundations have started to support for-profit companies with charitable capital in other sectors using a tool called a program-related investment, or PRI. PRI is just one of many tools available to charitable investors, which I'll speak more about later in my presentation. The bad news is that PRI making to the energy sector has been virtually non-existent since PRIs were first written into the tax code in 1969. The PRI records outlined on this slide are from a group called the Foundation Center that scrapes data from foundations' annual tax forms. Unfortunately, their records only cover PRI making from 1998 through 2014, but I think these numbers are descriptive enough to give us all a sense of what's happening. Of the 5,861 PRIs recorded by the Foundation Center since 1998, less than 3% pertain to science and engineering innovation, and of those, 33 separate transactions, that's 0.6%, pertain to climate change mitigation. It's important to note that more than half of those 33 are related to the developing world, which means that only 15 single transactions have focused on domestic technology innovation related to climate change. I think we can and will do better than 15 deals in the next 20 years. Like I said before, PRIs from foundations are just one tool available to philanthropists to support early stage energy innovation. It's critically important to acknowledge that there are many different types of charitable asset owners, each of whom confront distinct challenges in mobilizing impact investment capital. U.S.-based private foundations combine for a whopping $600 billion in assets under management, but it's important to know that that's spread over 86,000 different organizations, and that 60% have less than $1 million in assets under management. However, all of these combine for approximately $50 billion in grants per year, as David mentioned before. The top 10 corporate foundations have approximately $10 billion in assets under management, but corporate giving in total approximates $19 billion in grants every year. Donor-advised funds have continued to increase in popularity over the past 10 years, and today they approximately have $70 billion in assets under management and grants $13 billion annually. This includes the 800 community foundations in the U.S., each of which manage donor-advised funds for local residents. Community foundations alone comprise 10% of total U.S. grant making for about $5 billion annually. The information presented on this slide does not include additional charitable actors like single-family offices, multifamily offices with philanthropic advisory services, and high-net-worth households that might not use a foundation or a donor-advised fund structure for their charitable giving. But these are really important charitable actors as well, especially in the U.S., where 98% of our households give an average of 10% of their annual income to charity. So what the heck is happening? Putting charitable capital to work in early stage energy companies seems like a no-brainer, right? And giving in the way that David outlined earlier also seems like a no-brainer. If you can make a grant once and never see the money again, or you can make a grant in the style that we're talking about and potentially get it back, even in part, whole, or plus gains to re-grant to other good causes. It seems pretty obvious to those of us in the commercial space. But when I first started learning about this stuff in 2011, I was flabbergasted to learn that PRIs were a thing and that no one was using them for energy innovation. So here are some of the things we heard on our listening tour in 2013. This happened after I finished writing my MIT thesis in 2012 about how PRIs had been used in the field in the past and before we incorporated PRIME in 2014 to knock down those barriers. We met with hundreds of people from all sorts of charitable organizations, and we uncovered a very long list of barriers that are preventing this type of charitable investment from being made more frequently. I'd put these barriers into three categories. Number one, educational barriers. Number two, operational barriers. And number three, perceived policy barriers, which David alluded to earlier. To start with the educational barriers, many philanthropists don't know just how acute the mismatch is today between traditional risk investors and early stage climate innovation. Even if they do know, sometimes they don't know that they have tools in their toolbox to do something about it, which takes us to our operational barriers. Even if they know there's a gap and they can fill it, most philanthropic organizations are not organizationally supported to do the deal sourcing, due diligence, structuring of terms, and to become a value-added member of a board of directors for an early stage for-profit tech company. This includes both the organizational level, but also on a personal level. You can imagine being someone that's a program officer at a foundation who's been making grants to nonprofits, all of a sudden being asked to behave like a venture capitalist. It's a very difficult thing. Lastly, perceived policy barriers. It's very difficult on a deal-by-deal basis to know with certainty that an investment qualifies as charitable, especially since neither climate change nor energy is a charitable purpose in the tax code. But let me be clear, there is nothing that needs to change in the tax code in order for the philanthropy community to support early-stage climate innovators. I'll say that part again. There is nothing that needs to change in the tax code in order for the philanthropy community to support early-stage climate innovators. So what are we doing to bring down these barriers and unlock the floodgates? As I said before, PRIME was purpose-built in 2014 in an effort to lower as many of these barriers as possible for charitable investors. Today, we're a public charity. That means we're a nonprofit organization supported by forward-leaning grant makers to source and facilitate demonstrative transactions that can be held up as case studies for the field of philanthropic investing and to build better connectivity between philanthropists and climate innovators, such as this working on this webinar with ARPA-E and Impact Alpha. At PRIME, we think of ourselves as a two-sided marketplace. You can imagine an investment bank whose paramount end goal is to mitigate climate change rather than to make a profit. Don't get me wrong, we want the companies we support to make lots and lots of money. In fact, we only support for-profit innovators whose product or service is in lockstep with global greenhouse gas emissions reduction. But we offer our services to the field for free because it's so early days for philanthropic investors in the energy sector, and somebody needs to absorb the very painful sales cycle in the early days. And we want to be those people. Today, we have two ways to encourage philanthropists to enter the field of energy innovation. To date, these individuals tend to be people that are way out ahead of the curve, deeply understand our mission from personal experience, and also deeply care about field building. First, they can dip their toe as operational supporters of PRIME itself. And second, we bring philanthropists in as participants in the demonstrative investments that PRIME is facilitating. So to date, we've had 10 funders support PRIME and 8 funders support our docket companies. But we're just getting started, and we work hard every day to bring more philanthropists into the field. I think it's important to mention that something that's really important to us at PRIME is to bring in new actors, not just hit up the usual suspects like the family offices that many of you have probably heard of or worked with that already have their own energy investment deal teams. We're all about being additive and not duplicative. Like I said before, we have 2 nonprofit programs that we run today, facilitating demonstrative investments and building connectivity between philanthropists and climate innovators. I won't talk much about the second program today, but I will talk for a few minutes about our first 2 proof of concept investments, Couldnet Energy and Red Wave Energy. Couldnet Energy is a company that was founded by a team with extensive experience in the oil and gas industry. They're using oil and gas wells that are no longer producing hydrocarbons to turn pumped hydro storage on its head. They put water under pressure downhole and then remove the pressure to make the water shoot out of the wells and turn a turbine for ultra-low-cost grid capacity energy storage. This is radically different from a battery company or another high-tech solution, but all Couldnet needed to do was a field test that no one else was willing to pay for. And so with Prime's support, the Couldnet team's been able to crush their technical milestones, and now Couldnet has raised a follow-on round of capital from commercial investors. And I think this is quickly becoming a fascinating case study for high-risk, high-reward philanthropy, where philanthropic investors went first, retired technical risk, and gave the team sufficient data to encourage commercial follow-on investment in an industry that doesn't have that many traditional VCs actively investing. So this is really exciting stuff. I'll go into more detail about the mechanics of the Prime Coalition for Couldnet transaction in just a moment. First, let me tell you more about our second investment, RedWave Energy. RedWave's team closed their Series B round with a number of strategic investors that had a mandatory matching requirement. The Prime Coalition of Philanthropists stepped in to serve as that match and unlock a $6 million capital raise. RedWave develops a material that promises efficient conversion of industrial waste heat into electricity. I'm sure everyone watching this webinar knows that almost 60% of the world's energy is currently lost as heat, so this could be a big deal for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions by making fossil fuel consumption more efficient. The investments that Prime has made into Couldnet and RedWave are first of their kind, and we've learned a whole lot along the way. This slide shows the options we now know are available to various charitable asset owners to place charitable capital into early-stage energy companies that would achieve their climate impacts at scale, are attractive to follow-on commercial investors, but are dying on the vine because of the challenging venture capital environment that Nate described before. Some of these options include working through Prime as a public charity, and some do not. In our experience, many philanthropic investors prefer to work through grant making to a public charity like Prime rather than direct PRI making because it's more similar to what they've been set up to do for years. It doesn't make a difference to Prime because we aren't remunerated in either case, and our only goal is to get our docket companies supported. In the spirit of time, I won't go into detail on all of these mechanics right now, but please reach out directly to Team Prime if you're a philanthropist and would like to learn more. We're here to share what we've learned, and this stuff is very challenging to do really well by yourself. This slide shows how the Prime Coalition of Philanthropists participated in Couldnet Energy's Seed 1 round. 2 accredited households that cared deeply about climate impact made traditional convertible notes directly to the company and did not receive any type of tax benefit. The Sorensen Impact Foundation, a group based in Salt Lake City and really leading the charge to pioneer PRI making across industries in the U.S., made a convertible note directly to Couldnet and counted it as a program-related investment for their foundations. That means it counted as a grant, but it looked like a traditional convertible note. And then the Will and Jada Smith Foundation in Los Angeles participated as a recoverable grant through Prime. Like the direct investors, Will and Jada's foundation will also receive their grant plus interest back in a success scenario for Couldnet without Prime taking a cut. We really like the recoverable grant structure as an option, and we think it's under-discussed in the field, but pretty similar to program-related investments. To our knowledge, the support of Couldnet was the first time that traditional angel capital, PRI capital, and grant capital sat next to each other to support an early-stage energy company, but this is exactly the type of transaction we'd like to see replicated many, many times over in the years to come. As you can see, the Prime Coalition for RedWave again brought together different types of charitable asset owners using different mechanisms, but our priority at Prime is to make all of this easy for the company receiving investment and to do our very best to make the company only more attractive to follow-on investors by not messing with the terms. This is not dumb money, this is even smarter money. The RedWave deal pulled together donor-advised fund participants for the first time for Prime, which we see as one of the most promising groups of investors for future transactions. Donor-advised funds are similar to foundations, except they have less strict requirements on their grant making. We're also thrilled to have Just Good step in as our first corporate donor into this deal, and we're hopeful that more and more corporations will realize that this is a really smart way to give. So as I've said, we want to see more deals like Couldnet and RedWave get done, both for their own impact affecting Prime's mission of climate change mitigation at scale, but also as examples of what types of deals could be done with charitable capital. Here's the short list of companies that made it onto Prime's 2016 docket. We will be thrilled if we can support at least 2 more of these by the end of 2016. Our goal isn't to own the space or highlight every early stage company that might be eligible for charitable capital, but instead to close best-in-class examples that others will want to follow with or without Prime in the future. I won't go into detail on these businesses or our down selection process to choose them right now, but I will say that I've come up with I think our team has come up with a pretty creative annual funnel that leaves us being able to say that we've looked at as comprehensive as possible a registry of US-based early stage businesses across energy, agriculture, waste, and water, and that our shortlist is optimized for huge climate impact potential, commercial potential, and additionality. We just wouldn't be able to do this work without the vibrant startup ecosystem in the U.S., including groups like ARPA-E and others that support early-stage energy companies. So in conclusion, here's a short list of ways that you can be proactive in working with Prime or seeking support from philanthropic investors like the ones we've discussed today. Let me start by level setting about everybody's fear of missing out. This type of investment is not happening at scale yet. Whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, I always suggest not spinning your wheels and trying to raise tons of money from the philanthropy community quite yet, only because I know as a company founder, time is your most precious commodity, and you're going to drive yourself nuts trying to figure out different types of philanthropists. And if you know one foundation, you know exactly one foundation. So Team Prime will be here driving ourselves nuts for you in the meantime. You should make sure you're in the Prime registry, which you can do by filling out a short form on our website. We'll also be posting tools in the months to come to help you construct your own argument for charitability without Prime's help. And then in the coming year, we're planning to start in-person training sessions for entrepreneurs in partnership with our pipeline partners like incubators, accelerators, business plan competitions, and universities. If you do find yourself talking to one of the organizations I mentioned earlier, whether it's a foundation, a donor-advised fund, a grant-making public charity, a family office, please get in touch with us at Prime. We found one of the most useful things we can do is make introductions between philanthropists. So whoever you're talking to can talk to someone that's done a deal with us already for peer-to-peer validation, and they can share kind of scrubbed legal agreements to try and reduce transaction costs and all types of benefits of peer-to-peer learning. And then lastly, Scott Berger on Prime's team is our Director of Operation. He's based in Boston, and he's the best point of contact within our organization for companies and pipeline partners. He manages the whole side of our operation, and he's really nice, so please reach out. And with that, I will hand it back to Nate for a little Q&A.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah, for the great overview of PRIs as they relate to clean energy investment and climate solutions, as well as as an update on the progress that the Prime Coalition has made and the aspirations that it has. So we've got a few minutes here for questions that I'd like to pose to both of our panelists, and I think the first one is that, you know, as these new investment vehicles are popping up, you know, give us your sense of how much they're needed. And, you know, I guess the cause of that is, you know, related to clean energy investments. Is there a persistent capital gap, or is this kind of a transient thing?
David, I can go first if you'd like.
Yeah, no, Sarah, I think you should.
Okay, great. So I think this is definitely a persistent gap. So let me start by saying that I think criticizing the traditional venture capital industry and its performance in clean tech over the past decade is kind of unproductive and I think a little bit imprecise. You know, in most cases, 10-year close-ended venture funds are not organizationally suited for the type of companies that can make the biggest difference on the social problems that we care about in the philanthropy community. You know, fund managers have promised 20% IRR to their LPs, not to solve social problems, and that doesn't necessarily make them the bad guys. With the advent of companies that are acquired for over $1 billion in less than 5 years for relatively small investment amounts, the goalposts have moved for traditional VC to succeed in the 21st century. So as you can tell by taking a look at Prime's investment committee, we believe that venture capitalists are an integral part of a community of investors that has to work together for climate change mitigation to happen at scale. And their expertise can be really valuable to philanthropists who want to make sure they're being thoughtful and additive. So there's lots of lessons learned from VCs, and they want and are willing to share them. At Prime, we work really hard to make sure we're not crowding out commercial investors. We're making investments that won't we're not making investments that won't actually achieve our charitable goals, and that we're not wasting precious philanthropic capital that could make a meaningful difference in so many people's lives in other ways beyond supporting energy companies. So that's a long way to say I think this is definitely a persistent gap that's not going anywhere, but I'm hopeful that this group of asset owners is a potential solution.
And this is Nate, but I will just, it was kind of a leading question, but I will echo that, we at ARPA-E believe that it's a persistent and entrenched capital gap and are encouraged that more sources are coming in. I don't think there's that strong of a risk to crowd out a lot of capital, because really we need more capital coming in to ensure that we have many multiples of shots on goal as we develop a new pipeline of technologies that can ultimately scale. So kind of maybe backing up a little bit, just given the persistence of the capital gap and the need to get a lot of entrepreneurs to start companies and then to scale and then to create kind of a virtuous exit cycle. And then, compare and contrast that with the limited number of PRIs that have been made since the 70s, and specifically those focused on science and engineering and energy problems. Talk to us a little bit about how scalable you think PRIs, maybe generally for you, David, and then applicable to energy, Sarah. And when I think of scalable, both in terms of total capital and number of deals, and I think, we've made great progress and have a couple great test beds, but I think the reality is that, we've only done 2, or at least the Prime Coalition has done 2 deals, and give us some evidence about why you think these are going to be a growing trend.
Well, I can just say more generally, I think just to echo Sarah, venture capital is not the only form of capital that we should be looking at. As Sarah mentioned, there's various structural limitations on what venture can invest in, and likewise, PRIs are not the only form of charitable capital, as Sarah talked about in her presentation. For example, there's a new crop of philanthropic investors who've decided to forego the traditional foundation structure and go for what are effectively LLCs that do charitable investments. So the one that got a lot of attention recently was the Chan Zuckerberg initiative of Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook founder. But the Omidyar network has been structured that way for quite a while, and there's a growing number of others, and they don't have the same IRS restrictions that the foundations have, and therefore they can be more flexible. And in particular, I think that in this case, the tenor is the key thing. What are the structures that can have a longer time horizon for the payoff of those investments? And so, there's also a sort of new set of structures around holding companies that don't look to exit as quickly as a venture fund has to. So I think there's quite a lot of financial innovation and structure innovation that can be brought to bear on this field.
Yeah, and I would strongly agree with David that there's no shortage of ventures that are ready for this type of support. It really is the readiness of the philanthropy community to hop to. So, for example, this year at Prime, our registry of just U.S.-based companies across energy, agriculture, waste, and water, and only pre-commercial seed and Series A stage businesses, we assessed 1,800 companies. That's part of what makes this so hard for philanthropists, because it's nearly impossible not only to decipher good investment from bad investment so that they can actually know that the investment could get to scale and achieve their philanthropic goals, but among the good investment, which ones are a fit for philanthropic intervention versus those that would thrive without philanthropy. So that's something that we've kind of tried to set up Prime to be helpful with. But based on the philanthropy numbers I went through earlier in the presentation, if we could capture even a few basis points of annual grant making across various charitable asset owner types, I mean, we could very soon eclipse the entire venture capital industry in the U.S.
Well, great. I think that's both, that's inspiring, but also, sets the gauntlet for where we need to move with philanthropic communities to challenge the venture capital community. I say that in jest, but to complement the venture capital community, I think like I said, we need more sources coming in with different variants to this space if we're going to scale. So, thinking about the large scale and kind of capital intensive cycles of energy hardware, and Sarah, you showed on your initial graph of where Prime plays in the energy technology development cycle. Can you talk about where you think philanthropists can kind of get the best bang for their buck as they relate to energy technologies? Are there specific investment opportunities that have a greater catalyzing effect, or should it really be let's test the waters in early stage innovation, prototype scale up, and large scale demo?
That's a great question. Let me start by saying that I think innovation and deployment are both critical to achieving our climate change mitigation goals. For philanthropists, I think the stage that we'll be able to get people to move has to do with impact risk that the philanthropists themselves are willing to take on, combined with the capital requirement at the stage in question. So in other words, there's a perception that early stage opportunities have a lower likelihood of achieving the impact that somebody wants, but that later stage opportunities require more money than most philanthropists have available to put to work today. So at Prime, we're hoping that by working together and bringing together coalitions of philanthropists, we can overcome both of those concerns to get great deals done that give everyone involved outstanding bang for their buck, like the two early stage examples that we've done already and others that we have in the pipeline for the 2016 docket. So for us, I think we're hoping the kind of first thing to move will be the early stage opportunities, just in terms of check size, and because those are really high risk, high reward, could make a huge difference on the charitable purposes. And then if we get enough people around the table with philanthropic capital ready to go, I think there is opportunity for philanthropic capital to also play in the later stage opportunities down the road.
Well, thanks. And David, anything to add from other sectors and PRIs about where, what investments can have a catalyzing effect?
Well, I think there are examples in other categories, but I actually want to just come back on the energy case, because there are a group of leading foundations, and there's various sort of consortia and meetings going on to catalyze additional capital in energy innovation, I think both on early stage and on deployment. And so I know the MacArthur Foundation, the Packard Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, which is Eric Schmidt of Google fame, the Moore Foundation and others have been working to try to overcome this capital gap. And so I would say that this is something where we'll start to see more news in the coming year. And frankly, it's a leadership question, more generally. I mean, it's a persistent capital gap under current market conditions, but at the risk of getting slightly political, a price on carbon and other kinds of policy changes would go a long way towards creating a more favorable investment climate as well.
Great. Well, I've got two more questions. The first is for Sarah, and the second is for both of you. And the first one relates kind of specifically to energy. And as we talked about the different pools of capital coming into clean energy, and there's a lot of different entities that have been announced from, not just the Prime Coalition, but groups like the Aligned Intermediary and the Bill Gates-led Breakthrough Energy Coalition that, promise big checks or big fund sizes later on the road. Where do you think that those can have an impact, and how do they either complement or compete with Prime?
Oh, man, I see every effort in this field as important and necessary. And, based on the numbers that we presented earlier, this is a huge sandbox with tons of room for lots of people to play. The Aligned Intermediary actually launched out of Prime to serve a different type of asset owner. In the same way that Prime has designed intermediation for philanthropic investors, the Aligned Intermediary is designing intermediation for large institutional investors like universities, pension funds, university endowments, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. And so I think not only are efforts like that necessary, but it will only enliven the whole ecosystem along the innovation and deployment pipeline to get more smart people thinking about these capital gaps. So I think, yeah, I think it is not competitive at all, and in fact, we need more voices in the choir working together with bringing in people that have capital on the sidelines that are not yet participating in the types of investments that we're discussing here today.
I very much agree. We just need those entities to start deploying their capital. So we're wrapping up near the end, have time for essentially one more question. I want to pose it to both of our presenters. And I think you both did an excellent job kind of summarizing key lessons for both philanthropists and entrepreneurs as they relate to, as they seek philanthropic related investments. But, you know, I always think it's good to reiterate a couple points, and so I want to leave you all with the last word of what high-level lessons do you want to leave with early-stage entrepreneurs, and what lessons do you want to leave with philanthropists, foundations, et cetera?
I'll jump in. I think the lesson for entrepreneurs is that, you know, a mission-driven enterprise has various kinds of advantages. I mean, people have talked obviously about the retention and recruitment and talent advantages in having a social or environmental mission. And then I just want to say there may be, you know, capital advantages as well, as I mentioned earlier, about ability to access different pools of capital that may be either higher risk or longer return or what have you. And then I would say for the foundations, you know, there is a lot of expertise developing about how to deploy capital in very much more strategic and innovative ways. And it's clear that some foundations don't have the internal resources or staffing or capacity to do that, but there are all kinds of groupings now where that kind of capital can find allies and co-investors, and some of the heavy lifting can be done by others if the funders are willing to do it. And frankly, Prime is a prime example of that, and there are other groupings as well. So I don't think the logistics and legalities should be a hindrance to folks who want to now see whether they can leverage their capital in more strategic ways for these kind of areas.
I think those are great answers. My answer would be to entrepreneurs. I'm sorry that this isn't happening yet, but there are a lot of smart people that are working on it, so stay tuned. And then for philanthropists, we now know that there's a whole bunch of ways to deploy your grant and charitable capital into early stage energy innovation, and that there are really smart, experienced people with battle wounds to share lessons learned that want to help you get in the game. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to Prime, you know, so that we can get to know your interests and be as helpful as we possibly can.
Well, that's a great conclusion. Big thanks to both of you, David Bank, the founder of Impact Alpha, and Sarah Kearney, founder and executive director of Prime. Thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise today.